Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Home Tech. I'm Seth Johnson, and joined as always by Jason Griffin. Jason, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Seth. How are you?
I'm doing very well now that Trello is working again. How's your life going?
I know the feeling. Oh my God, it was a little traumatic. I was catching kind of a hard time at work because I was running around the office going, is your Trello working? Can you get Trello to work? What about you? And eventually figured out that it was an outage bigger than Trello. In fact, Amazon Web Services had a big issue. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard about it, but it took down my dearly beloved Trello for, gosh, I think a few hours, couple hours at least. And man, I have to say, I felt lost without it.
I don't know how you function. I mean,
it made me realize how ridiculously reliant on Trello I've become. I use it really as my day-to-day, minute-to-minute kind of task manager at work in my home technology work. And so, we love these cloud services and they do a lot for us. And this one does it for free, and that's all great. And I've been using it for years without incident, but this was a reminder that nothing is perfect.
Right. And this was a bit, like you said, alluded to, this was a bigger issue with some of the Amazon, what they call Amazon Web Services. It's actually, people may know Amazon for shopping and making the nice little Echo thing that you yell at. But they actually make a lot of money running the entire web for just about every tech company out there. They have a massive scaling computer operation in the background that makes tons of money. And one of their, it's hard to go into, within a region, so within Virginia, one of their availability zones, which was East number 1, went down hard. Now, that's not really like a bad thing, but it seems like a lot of companies had made apps like, Trello, we're mentioning Trello, that only were available in that one, availability zone, and didn't really do the whole data replication thing where they were, expanding their app out beyond one data center or something. So when this one went down, everything went down for companies like Trello. I know there were a lot of Alexa skills that were maybe built within that region on virtual computers within that region. And I know Ring had their telephone number. They must have a phone server running in there. That went down. And I thought one of the saddest ones I noticed was Nest, parts of Nest and the I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. You're a $3 billion investment by Google, and you can't use Google servers. You're using Amazon. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So there was quite a few, and definitely a reminder again that we get pretty reliant on these services, and Greg in the chat room is asking if Nest went down. I heard that too. I don't know how extensive that was, but I did hear that as well. I heard Savant had a couple of issues. So it's a big deal, and thankfully everything seems to be back up and running now. But Seth, let's dive in here because we've got a lot to cover. We've got a great episode here, and want to tease really quickly. We had Mitch Klein on from the Z-Wave Alliance. He's the executive director over there. And if you're tuning in for that, be sure to stay tuned. Seth and I are going to talk about a few news stories here before we get into the interview, but really had a great time chatting with Mitch, learning a little bit more about the Z-Wave Alliance. Obviously, as a technology, Z-Wave has been around for quite a while, and it's just one of those things that I haven't devoted enough time to really learning about. So enjoyed chatting with him, and like I said, be sure to stay tuned for that. But before we get into it, we're going to jump in to a few of our news stories. Actually, Seth, there was one thing I wanted to remind you, and I feel like we're turning into like an old married couple or something, because you and I had an anniversary recently and we totally forgot about it.
Was I supposed to get flowers?
I was expecting something. No,
I said a white warmer one year.
So yeah, you did. That's very true. We had our 3 years. So I realized this just the other day, February, let me double check this. February 12th, 2014 was when we pushed out our first episode. So here we are in March, and so we have officially passed the 3-year mark with the Home Tech podcast. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. And man, what a ride. I it seems like it was yesterday, but when we were talking about this earlier, we've each one of us have had kids in this amount of time. Like we've had children, like we started families. There's been a lot that's happened in the last 3 years, other than home tech, and man, it's all blown by so quickly.
Yep, it really has. A lot has changed, and it's been a lot of fun doing the show, and we've got a lot of great supporters who join us week in and week out, and we really appreciate it. And it's a labor of love here, but we do enjoy doing it, and that's what keeps us going. So good time there to just thank our listeners, and really quickly also mention that we've got a lot of people that have supported the show financially. You can do that for as little as $1 a month, and the way that you can learn more about doing that is to head over to HomeTech.fm/support. Once again, that's HomeTech.fm/support, and that is where you can go if you want to learn how to become a patron of the show, and you can do that for as little as $1 a month. So once again, huge thanks to all of you who have taken the time and given the generous donations over there. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely, we really do. It keeps us going every week. Keeps some of the bills paid for sure, and really does help us get motivated. And man, the Slack channel has been absolutely slammed. I mean, we've got a good group over there that just love to sit there and talk all day, every day. So we've been having some
that's
good
one of the things
there.
that we probably that's one of the things I don't think we do maybe a good enough job of mentioning is that at that $1 a month level, you do get access to our private Slack channel called The Hub. And it's really fun. We have a lot of fun with that room. There's a lot of great dialogue going on in there pretty much on a daily basis. And so if you want to be a part of that, again, HomeTech.fm/support, $1 a month gets you into that. So we appreciate it. But let's jump in here. Seth, you alluded to when we were talking about our anniversary and how much has changed in 3 years that we've been doing the show. Calls to mind an article I wanted to discuss this week. Stacey Higginbotham, who I think most of our listeners are probably familiar with, believe this went out in one of her email newsletters, Stacey Knows Things. So she does the Internet of Things podcast. Great show. If you haven't checked it out and you're a fan of what we do here, I'd encourage you to go check that out. But in one of her newsletters recently, she did a little piece asking the question if connected products should come with an expiration date. And this was passed to me through the Hub, I believe. Forgetting off the top of my head who passed that along, and I apologize. But the general argument that she's making is that, we've got all these devices like, I don't know, Amazon Echo, smart locks, smart light switches that are just flooding the market at this point. And, at a certain point, they got to push the hardware out there, get it into the real world. And at that point, the hardware is pretty much static, but in the background, you've got software and features that are continuing to be developed. And is there some sort of mechanism that we need to put in place to make sure that consumers understand that if you buy a connected light switch, for instance, that it's not going to have an indefinite shelf life? And I think the point that she's making is good there. I couldn't quite tell if Stacey was being serious about putting an expiration date on these products or if she was just using that as a way to frame the argument. But I don't think that's actually feasible or practical to do that. All the same, I think it's a good point that she's making and something that consumers definitely need to think about.
Right. I think this is one of those things that this is a tough one because now I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking about Ram Malasani's company, Securify, where he just came on our show and he makes routers and fairly, inexpensive routers for what they are. But he's introduced a security updates basically for X amount a month, and there may be something to that. Like if you go out and you buy an Echo to get updates and security on it, maybe there's a monthly cost, or maybe there's an expiration date on it. I don't know. I don't know how to think. I don't know how I feel about the expiration date. Like it just stops working, and that didn't work very well for like Revolve. But there's definitely an argument to be made for, hey, you bought this piece of hardware 3 years ago. Like all the profit has been spent since then. And any goodwill, towards developing additional features, that the company has done in that amount of time. like what does the company do? Did they stop development on it? That's what kind of a lot of the router companies do now, is they just, you have a router that's 3 to 5 years old. Geez, if it doesn't have a recent security update, just throw it away and go get a new one. I mean, they're not worth having the security risks and issues on them. But man, I don't know. I don't know what to think about this. Even it is kind of a funny idea to she has a can with like a stamp on it with the expiration date on it, which I find funny. But I don't know. Maybe there is something to this. Maybe in lieu of doing like a hardware purchase that costs a lot of money, there's maybe a tier of product that could do updates, maybe $10 a year or something like that. And you get an updates moving forward. I don't know. This definitely, it's one of those things that could add up over time, right? Like if you get 30 devices and they all cost you $10 a year, I mean, that's not going to be pretty have to pay that hidden tax on these products moving forward.
Yeah. Well, I think it's it's a good thought exercise either way, and would love to hear what our listeners think. If you have thoughts on this, at HomeTech Podcast over on Twitter would be a good way to connect with us. Like I said, I think that she makes some valid points here. Like you alluded to, she talks about one day, maybe we'll get our products as a service instead of buying them up front. So you were kind of talking about that, and maybe that's a model that actually works a little bit better as the hardware gets, less expensive and it becomes more feasible to do that. But I think generally speaking, to me, the biggest takeaway here is that it would theoretically help raise customer awareness that, or consumer awareness, I should say, that you don't buy these things and expect them to work forever, but probably not feasible to actually put an expiration date on there. Interesting thought exercise, like I said, all the same. But let's move on here. Next story, Seth, that I wanted to hit this one as soon as I saw it, and it's the Turn Touch. It's a tactile control device. I think we're going to need a sound effect for every time one of these devices comes out.
Oh man, I left the bells and the buttons up there. I should have had it ready. Oh man, this is something I could get you for the anniversary gift here, I think, and you'd be totally all
there. You go.
Yeah.
Now you're thinking. Yeah, pretty cool looking device. I've said it a bunch of times, and I'll reiterate it. I just think that consumers in the smart home are getting a little bit of app fatigue, if painting with broad strokes there, obviously, but I think that we're slowly seeing a more creative and fresh approach to tactile physical control, and this thing is a pretty cool looking device. It's another one made out of wood, Seth. We've had two devices made out of wood just in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's kind of strange to think about.
So
right?
Maybe it's a trend.
Yeah.
It's a move away from black plastic boxes, and I don't think that's a bad thing either, personally.
I think this one has more going for it than the I think we're talking about the Cavo from last week, which is like a wooden VCR type box that's supposed to sit up by your TV. Like
VCR.
Well, I'm just thinking like the old 80s VCR cabinets that had wood vinyl or whatever it is on the side of them. But this is like made out of mahogany and it fits in your hand. You're going to touch this thing. It's got a couple buttons on it. You can program them to do whatever, like play music, turn on and off lights. I think it's a pretty cool little device. And from what I was reading, the guy who has made this, or the company that's making this, actually has device experience. So they know what they're doing. And this is one of those ones I don't mind mentioning on the show. Like some of these Kickstarter things, we get plugged all the time.
On, and
it's
that's
like,
true.
I don't see that one taking off too much, but this one, I think this one's going to make it. It's got 51,000 to 2,500. I think this is going to ship.
Yeah. So 51,000 pledged of their 25,000 goal. As we're sitting and recording this, about 8 days to go. So they look to be in pretty good shape. I think it's a neat product. Go check it out. We'll include a link to it. HomeTech.fm/151 is where you can go. And we'll put a link up to that. Again, it's called the Turn Touch, kind of a neat looking device. Let's move on here to our third and final news story is a big one. YouTube TV just announced. So it looks like this is probably one of the more, one of the larger, more compelling competitors to traditional cable that we've seen so far. We've got a few of them out there now. Sling TV, DirecTV Now are the two that kind of come to the top of my mind. But this looks pretty compelling. $35 a month. It's got the power of YouTube behind it, which is obviously a huge deal. I read in one of the stories that YouTube now streams 1 billion hours of video per day, which just blew my mind when I read that. So interesting looking deal. We'll talk about some of the details, but I think that just a sign of a trend that we've been talking about for quite some time now, which is just the evolving landscape in TV. So pretty cool.
Yeah, and YouTube has always been a major content player. They've started to get more serious about what they're doing over the last couple of years, and I think this kind of takes them into like a more traditional level. I wouldn't say the next level, because I think they are actually the next level. It's other companies that are going to have to step into the role that they've been able to provide for the last decade or so. But think about this. I mean, YouTube does advertisements. Like if you go to YouTube right now and you hit play on a video, more than likely you're going to get a 10 or 5 or 10 second ad in front of it as a pre-roll, and some of the longer ones have 2 ads on them. YouTube can make and inject advertisements, so they're effectively a cable company now. Like as soon as they start shipping this, they're going to be able to drop their own advertisements in there. And the YouTube app is everywhere. Like it's on Apple TV, it's on your TV without your TV even being plugged into cable. The funny thing is, I saw that Comcast was, all excited about pushing out an update to the Xfinity X1 box with a YouTube app. And whoops, that's kind of funny. Now that YouTube is probably going to be a pretty good competitor for the content delivery, at least, not so much the internet.
Right.
But man, I think this is a huge deal, and kind of talks into like, it goes into that broader conversation that we've been having. Like not only does this compete with the cable company, but it's also going to compete with integrators. Like you're out there installing video distribution systems to pipe 3 cable boxes to 40 TVs in somebody's giant McMansion house. Why are you going to need that if every TV just has an app on it that when you go to watch TV, it just launches the YouTube app and you're there watching the 35 right now channels with unlimited DVR that you want? I don't know where that's going to leave video distribution systems. And I know that's kind of pie in the sky. Like it's probably not going to work that way, Seth, but it's a start. And we're not far away from that actually working the way I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely a sign of the future. And if nothing else, it gives you your opportunity to do your weekly rant against the future of video distribution.
I say that, man. Where I work, that's our bread and butter. That's what pays my bills, And
it's tough. It's tough. It's a big category for home technology professionals, and it's one of these difficult things right now. If you're a consumer and you're going back and forth on, do I do video distribution? I still think there are instances where it makes sense. And if you know what you're buying and you have your fundamentally sound reasons for buying it, then, by all means. I think that in the future, this sort of thing is all going to go to the cloud, and we've got apps like you alluded to that, live on your TV or live on your Apple TV or Chromecast or whatever it is. But I think the real question is, how long does it take until we get there? There was an article from last week that I don't think we touched on. It's been floating around there for a little while. Mossberg over on The Verge talked about TV is changing, but not fast enough. And really great article. We'll link to that in the show notes. I'm not going to dive into it in depth here, but just some interesting thoughts on what's going on in the world of TV right now. What is it going to take to get to that next level? What are your options right now? All of that. And so I think that your point is right about how this impacts the future of video distribution. I think it's just a question of what sort of time frame are we looking at. Some of the other things that are important to note about this, and I want to make sure we hit them before we forget, is that this is launching in select U.S. cities only, is what the story says right now. So, if you're listening in other parts of the world, then obviously that's relevant. Looks like out of the gate, it's going to work with Chromecast, Google Home, obviously computers on a web interface, iOS and Android. 3 simultaneous streams per account. So that could, I think in 90...
That kills my video distribution argument, right?
Yeah.
But
yeah, well, in a large home, but I mean, interestingly enough, you did say, well, you're building a video distribution system to pipe 3 cable boxes around the house. Well, there's your 3 streams right there. So that's sort of the analogy. 6 user profiles with separate logins per account, and like you said, a cloud DVR with unlimited storage. So those are some of the bullet points other than channels, which, we won't go through a whole list. You can go over to HomeTech.fm/151 and we'll have a link. But, you've got the usual suspects, CBS, Fox, NBC. I see ESPN on here, FX, CNBC, Fox News, and a bunch of others. So I think, I forget what the exact count is, and I think that's still subject to change. In fact, that brings me to my last point I wanted to make sure we mention, is that there's no clear indication about exactly when this is going to become available. We just know it's coming soon. So we don't have an exact date yet either.
Yep. I went ahead and signed up for it just because, I actually use YouTube. Right now I can go into it and watch I think you can watch most news channels live, like CNN or Fox News. They broadcast live right on YouTube. So you can go in and without a cable company thing, you just go in and watch those channels. So if there's anything major going on, and at the same time, I'm on the Apple TV, I can back out of that, drop into Netflix or Hulu and watch, something else when I want to. I don't know. I think this is going to be a huge deal if it gets rolled out in a number of markets. Greg's reminding us over in the chat room. He's out of country, and the rest of the world. This seems to be this is only a U.S. thing. So he's saying this, just like Netflix, they'll probably have to hack it through VPNs to get it to work in the rest of the world. But this stuff is this is kind of a big deal, I think, for YouTube. So it's just going to take time to work out all the details, and when it does, I think you're going to see more of these, YouTube or PlayStation View, Sling TV. You're going to see these kind of come to the forefront. Heck, maybe even Comcast, they'll have an X1 app that you can run on your TV too. I wouldn't discount that at all. I think that's definitely something that could happen just as easily as the YouTube app has.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point. Last thing I want to say about it is, that idea of this being tied to an app, and what does the control look like? And I think for the vast majority of younger people, obviously, I would assume all of our audience here, that's not going to be a tripping point. But, if you start thinking about mainstream adoption and just what we've all grown up with and been conditioned to our whole lives is, having that cable remote or that DirecTV remote right by the TV and just sort of hitting on and all of a sudden something comes up on the TV and bam, you're watching TV. So I think there still is potential for some friction there as far as the usability for particularly less tech savvy consumers. And I think that'll be a limitation if you look at the big picture for adoption of these sort of over the top, cutting the cord type of offerings. But I think as we're seeing more companies come to the fray and bring these sort of offerings, and younger consumers are less inclined, I believe, to purchase a cable contract with big, packs of channels, 90% of which they never watch, and it's all linear programming. And there's a lot of these things that I think are just becoming antiquated. And I think younger consumers in particular are going to flock to services more like YouTube TV. Again, I just think it's going to take maybe a little bit more time, perhaps than you're thinking it might.
Valid points. I think it will take time. This has all been tricky. I think this would have been done what's funny is like Apple was trying to do this way back with the old Apple TV rumors, and they were trying to get everybody on board. And the content creation companies and cable companies just dug in and said, no, we don't want you to disrupt our business here. Because we've had it so great for the last 30 or 40 years. We really have this on roll, even though everybody hates how this works. We're making money, and we like it. And so that's something that's going to take a lot longer to go away, I think, than me or most people who are cord cutters think. But I don't know. You get companies like Netflix and Amazon dumping millions of dollars into high production products and productions. You're going to see that exodus happen, because really the action isn't on ABC anymore. It's on Netflix. That's a compelling drive. If I'm paying, it's under $10 a month for streaming Netflix, why in the world would I even bother paying $100 for the a month for the 90 cable channels that I don't watch at all? I mean, and it, like you said, it's linear TV. All those decisions we made, and that's why we ended up cutting the cable, because we simply saw no value in what they were able to deliver, other than like the 5 or 6 programs that we like to watch, like Walking Dead and that kind of thing. We still can't really get. We have to kind of find it off the back of a truck somewhere, but we're still
hack around it a little bit.
Yeah, well, we're still able to make ends meet, I suppose. But it's just
the struggle is real.
And exactly. And I would pay to see those particular shows that we really like. We would probably pay money, a ridiculous amount of money, to see those as they come in. So, yeah. I think this is going to happen. I don't know, man. I'm not going to say it's like within a year, but I think it's definitely going to be within 5 that we're going to see some major movement away from cable companies.
Yep. Well, it'll be fun to watch, and it'll give us a lot of material here for the podcast. Yep. So I really think that's a fascinating area as far as I'm concerned of the market, and just really enjoy reading those stories and seeing what's happening there. And so, we'll keep an eye on it, and obviously keep our listeners updated. But let's go ahead and jump into our interview. Once again, we had Mitch Klein on from the Z-Wave Alliance, and he joined us just to give us an update on what's new with Z-Wave and what they've been working on. So really had a great time chatting with him, and we hope you enjoy. Hey, Mitch, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing fabulous, and it's great to be here, Jason and Seth.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time. You and I had a chance to meet very briefly out at ISE just recently, and we've been looking forward to getting you on the show to learn a little bit more about Z-Wave and what the Alliance has going on these days. But before we jump into that, why don't you give our listeners just a brief personal introduction, maybe talk about some of your industry background?
Sure, absolutely. To call me seasoned, I think, would be an understatement. I've been in the industry for quite a while. I had my own integration company way back, like started in the late 1980s, really, called Media Systems, and ultimately grew to a staff of about 38 people. And we were doing installations for, the top people in the Boston area, and ultimately ended opening up a branch in West Palm Beach because our customers in Boston would kind of hang out in Palm Beach during the winter. So a lot of experience trying to make devices work together that were never intended to work together. And I guess at the time we were called Mavericks because a lot of the things we were doing back then are things that are well accepted norms today. But back then, we were sort of upsetting the apple cart, if you will. I ended up growing it for about 15 years to about a $6 to $7 million company, and then moved on to doing some consulting. Hey, listen, being an integrator is really hard work. I'm sure your listeners know that, and it's still the hardest job I ever had was running an integration company. So kudos to all you guys listening. It's really hard. We understand that, so keep it up. Did consulting work on the manufacturing side for companies that you've heard of, like Pioneer and Microsoft and Epson and others, and then a lot of companies you never heard of who obviously didn't take our advice, so they never made it. From there, I went on to running the product development side for a company called Universal Remote Control. Many of your listeners are familiar with that company. And while I was there, I took them from a handheld remote control company, brought them into the world of network and Ethernet and whole house control, launching the Total Control line. And then, of course, moving them into whole house control with Z-Wave, which is kind of how it moved me onto my next role, which is where I am now, which is executive director of the Z-Wave Alliance. So hopefully I haven't bored you with that information yet.
No, that's great. I think that's a really, I think that's a really rich background. And we always like, when we have people on from the manufacturing side that have a background in integration, I think there's a lot of value there because, as you alluded to, it is a difficult job, and being able to relate to those daily battles that home technology professionals face is really valuable experience. So we talked about your history a little bit, and I know there's a lot of history to the Z-Wave Alliance as well. But maybe just give our listeners the quick synopsis, the brief history of the Z-Wave Alliance.
Sure. Z-Wave itself was developed in 1999 in Copenhagen by a company called Zensys. Interesting trivia, I had been asking people, what is Z-Wave? Why Zensys? Where did the Z come from? And it took quite a bit of effort to find out. So here's your little bit of trivia. Zensys was all about Zen systems, and hence Z-Wave was all about Zen, meaning, my life is Zen, Anyway, if you're not sure what that is, go Google it. But anyway, 1999 in Copenhagen. In 2001, Zensys was purchased by a company called Sigma Designs. Actually, wait a minute, I got my dates wrong. 2001, it was brought to the U.S., pardon me. And in 2008, it was purchased by Sigma Designs, which is a public company, and they're the chip manufacturer, and they pretty much are the ones responsible for Z-Wave as we know it today. Copenhagen remains the center of Z-Wave R&D, which is why, as I joked earlier, I'm Boston-based. I got staff in Europe as well as in California, so I can work whatever 16 hours a day I want, much like your integrators. So anyway, that's kind of a real brief history. There's no other platform that was designed specifically for the smart home that exists today, and certainly back in 1999, that was pretty revolutionary. So that's kind of the quick history without boring you with too many other details.
So what's Z-Wave look like today? What's the overall view of the alliance, number of companies, and how many products are out there right now?
It's a great question. So there's kind of two separate things. There's the Z-Wave side where we can talk about the technology, which I'm sure we'll get into momentarily. And then there's the alliance side, which is not so much about the technology as it is about the ecosystem, the members, and building the community. The alliance today is a little over 450 members. I mean, we're getting new members every day. Many integrators are joining, as a matter of fact. So a little over 450. The vast majority of members are actually developing products for them, brands that many of you are familiar with, and then there are a lot of brands that you guys have probably never heard of, and I never heard of until I came over to the Alliance. We also have members that are retailers, resellers, distributors, OEMs, so that they're buying products built by company A and reselling in company B. An example of that could be like my former company, URC, where for a speed to market reason, it made no sense for us as URC to start developing gateway or hubs when we could actually go to a company that already builds them and have them essentially OEM it for us. So OEM is also a fairly sizable business for Z-Wave.
And like you said, let's chat a little bit about a little bit about the tech side of Z-Wave. It is I'll just kind of dish out what I know, and you can
Sure.
You can verify or disqualify.
Okay.
I know it's a mesh network, and I know it's in a ton of products that are available for both integrators and in the DIY market space. And that's about where I leave Z-Wave.
Okay. Well, that's actually pretty good right out of the gate.
Nice.
There's a handful of things one should know that differentiates Z-Wave. And, yes, you mentioned mesh network. But let me go back up a moment and talk about sort of the core values for what drove Z-Wave and what continues to drive the development and why so many manufacturers and service providers have jumped on it. And I'll get into the service provider thing in a little while. So first of all is that the mandate for Z-Wave is interoperability. That is absolutely essential. So what that means is if you are going to build a product and utilize Z-Wave, you must deploy the proper application layer within the software stack. That means that you will be compatible with others. So for example, and I use door locks because this was one of the challenges I always had, and I'm sure a lot of the integrators have, is that when you deploy, say, a Yale door lock, you need to have a particular driver for that Yale. And then the customer says, well, the quick set is really what I want for the side door. And, geez, now I got to build another driver for a quick set. We've all lived that with the core control companies that we've all known and loved for years. For Z-Wave, when Yale says, I want to do Z-Wave, it means that they are compliant with the application layer for door locks. That means that the Yale will operate right along with the Kwikset, which will operate right along with the Baldwin and the Schlage and anyone else who deploys Z-Wave in their door lock. That's enormous because it gives you as an integrator choice. You can pick the right products for the right application. The second mandate is for backwards compatibility. Talk with any engineer that develops platforms and they'll tell you that's the thing they hate more than anything, because backwards compatibility means that it sort of limits you in terms of deploying a whole new generation of your platform. But what it also means is, listen, you go and buy a phone, people replace their phones every 18 months or 6 months, depending on what phone you buy. But once you put in a door lock, you're not replacing it. Or you're not replacing a light dimmer that you've installed or a thermostat. Once it's in, and you're not replacing it. And because of that, the backwards compatibility is a core requirement. There's no other platform that can state that as well. So if any of your integrators go out to a job site and there's an existing Z-Wave dimmer, it'll work with the new stuff. It may not have quite the same functionality if it's an older one, but it'll still work. So that's the second piece. The third piece, as you mentioned, Seth, is about the mesh network. One of the challenges when you try to operate battery devices is the balance between the power that you provide with it. How far can this thing operate? How far will it transmit? The more power you give it, the less the battery life. So mesh networking became, again, from day one, said, okay, if we can kind of get from point A to point B, if we limit the power, if we say it's only going to work, say, a maximum of, say, 30 feet, for argument's sake. If we got to go 60 feet, we got to make sure we can still get there and back, because remember, Z-Wave is a two-way communication protocol. So it's designed to be able to use other Z-Wave products as repeaters. This is a term that we've always used as repeaters. There's no specific repeater that one would buy for Z-Wave because all powered Z-Wave devices act as repeaters. So those are really the three core, and I'm sorry if I kind of went off too far on that, but that's a good start on where Z-Wave is from a technology perspective.
No, I think it's a great synopsis, and it's important to understand, what makes the technology unique and what is, driving the company. And I've always gotten a feeling that it's designed to be a very installer friendly or install friendly technology in terms of the, interoperability, backwards compatibility, as you alluded to. Those are very big deals for anyone who's dabbled in the smart home or who works in it. Obviously knows that that's really important. To that end, I was actually curious. I saw this story a little while back, and not being super immersed in the Z-Wave ecosystem, I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, and wanted to see if you could just shed some light on the significance of it. And that was Sigma Design's decision to publicly release some of the interoperability layer and sort of make it open source is my understanding. Can you talk about that, and what is the significance of it?
Sure. There have essentially only been 2 points of resistance behind adoption of Z-Wave for some of our manufacturers. One of them has been the fact that the requirement for a potential developer to purchase a developer's kit, which can range between $2,000 and $4,000, just to go in and start playing with the technology. So it did limit access. So what Sigma Designs opted to do is to essentially make Z-Wave not just the application layer, but you pretty much can go in to the Sigma Designs website and have access to the entire protocol and go and develop with it with a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone or whichever one you want. And if it's for personal use, it doesn't cost you one penny. You can go ahead and just go around and play with it and develop a product or develop an application for it. If you want to commercialize it, that's the point where then you need to buy the developer's kit, go through certification, so on and so forth. So the real driving point was to enable companies to get experience with Z-Wave, to make a determination if it's the platform of choice for them. And the reason this has become that important is that when we talk about the ecosystem, I love the fact that we have manufacturers and small companies and one-offs that can build just a product. They do not need an entire product line in order to sell this one product. For example, I've got this one company that's in the process of developing a sliding door lock for Z-Wave. I mean, no one builds that at this point, if you think about it. How many sliding doors are there in Florida? Right?
Yeah, I got two.
And you can't put a traditional door lock on a sliding door.
Nope.
So
not
this
at all.
right. So this company goes and develops a Z-Wave sliding door lock. That's all they need. And then now they're compatible with every door lock out there. So you can build.
That'll be nice.
It's huge.
Get one of those put in, yeah.
And I love that. I got a company that actually built a Z-Wave mousetrap. I'm not going to get into that. Or another
maybe a discussion for another night, I think. That's pretty funny. Well, another one of the big pushes you guys have had this year, and I'm glad you mentioned door locks, because it's around security. And we've been hearing so much about this S2 security framework that you have put together, and its UL certification. Can you tell us a little bit about that, like a high level look into and what that means and what that's going to mean for Z-Wave moving forward?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, let's be clear that the current security level with existing Z-Wave products is still superior to anything else on the marketplace. But there's been certain limitations to it. So it's almost 4 years ago, Sigma Designs and Z-Wave started working on the new level, which is being called S2. It's a whole new security framework introduced with the latest SDK that is now mandated to be deployed in any product submitted for certification as of April 2nd this year. So what does that do? That brings the strongest level of AES encryption to all devices, and it's actually built into the firmware. So as a product developer, you're not actually using additional overhead to the software stack. It's already in the firmware. It's improved protection against eavesdropping, pardon me, using industry standard, and I love this because I actually remember it, elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange, ECDH. Now, what does that mean? That means when one goes to include a device into a Z-Wave system, that product is exposed to somebody who's out there sniffing. This is typically where hackers get in on Wi-Fi or Zigbee or Bluetooth, is during that inclusion process. So by deploying this ECDH key exchange, it actually requires the user, while they're including this product into the ecosystem, to either use an optional QR code or just simply to punch in a separate code number, so that man in the middle simply can't sniff it and just start hacking away. That's
very cool.
That's pretty impressive. The second piece of it is that it also ties into the IP side. So, there's Z-Wave over IP, and so it's also using a secure TLS1 tunnel which is also pretty industry standard for communication back and forth through the internet. What it also means for the end user is it reduces the latency. I think any of your users have found when you're trying to activate an access device, whether it's a garage door or a door lock or any other type of access device, that there is a lag time which is happening, during the authentication process. It's a requirement. The new S2 reduces that latency considerably. Not like there was really a problem with Z-Wave before, but because it's built into the firmware and because of the way it gets included into the system, the latency is almost imperceivable from the time you access the door lock to the time the door lock actually does what you've asked it to do. So it's pretty cool. And it's for all classes. It's all for all classes of products too. So now you can have S2 security into dimmers, into thermostats. So it's not just for access devices as well.
Oh, hey, that's pretty good to know. And everything that you've talked about, I mean, that's all pretty industry security, like security industry standard type stuff. This is the encryption that you're using to actually get online and go to your bank account.
Correct.
And if you have a good bank, they're hopefully using this encryption and when you download your statements online. So that's good to know. I mean, and even the Diffie-Hellman key exchange, that's pretty huge to have. For I think the only exploits I've seen on Zigbee type systems or Z-Wave Zigbee type systems are those like man in the middle attacks at the very beginning. Like odds are it was never going to happen, but that's where there was an exploit, and it looks like you guys have taken care of that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's also important to point out that there has never been a known hack of a Z-Wave system. You read about these hacks. There have been some high-profile ones, obviously on IP, obviously on Wi-Fi, and several on Zigbee, but there's been no known attacks successfully on Z-Wave, and now we just made it that much harder.
And and you guys have been developing this for quite some time, right? This is not something that because of the headlines of IoT security, it's just we should probably release this now. No, this is something you guys have been working on for a couple of years now, right?
Call it good timing on our part, but you can't develop this stuff overnight. I'll put it that way. And like I said, it took almost 4 years for us to develop this, to release it, to get the information out to our members, to get our members to understand it, to be able to deploy it. It's not something you can do quickly. Right.
That makes sense. So talk about that decision to, make this implementation mandatory. Obviously, we understand the reasoning for Z-Wave and why you guys want to do that, but how has this been received amongst the membership? I got to imagine it makes some of the manufacturing implementation maybe a little bit more difficult, but just talk about that and sort of the math you guys did when you made that decision.
Right. Yeah, it does add a little bit more development time to existing products. On a new product, it's just built into the firmware. So these types of decisions are made by the board of directors and also by working groups. So there was an S2 working group, which is made up of Z-Wave Alliance members. Word goes out, says, here's what we're working on, and it's a call for participation. And our members dive in and they participate in these working groups. Once the board agrees to go forward with it, then once the S2 has been developed, the board makes the determination in terms of how much time to give members to start testing the new SDK and to start working with it, and then at what point to make it mandatory. And anytime you put a hard cutoff, that's always going to create a flurry of activity, and obviously we've had that flurry of activity. There has been zero resistance from our members. If we talk about resistance, that would be more about timing than anything else. But we all understand security is top of mind. This stuff is happening every day. One of the industry publications actually does This Week in Hacking emails. So, we know this is top of mind. So our members are all over it. I think it's a great thing to do.
Great. Great. And one of the other questions, we talked about backwards compatibility as sort of a central tenet of the Z-Wave Alliance and your mission there. Presumably, all of these S2 security mandates will not affect any, sort of backwards compatibility, and everything is going to implement these new standards. Is that correct?
Mostly, yes. The S2 framework is backwards compatible, meaning that you can update any existing device to S2 if it's built on Z-Wave Plus or basically a 500 series chip. So a gateway that's in the field, that's a Z-Wave Plus gateway, can be updated over the air to S2 security framework. If it's an older product, if it's using one of the older chips, it cannot be updated to S2. Now, the good news is it will still be fully compatible with all of the S2 products, but depending on which product it is, it's always going to be either the S0, as we call it, or S2. So, for example, if you got an S2 gateway, all of the Series 500 or Z-Wave Plus products will be S2 secured. Older products will be operating on the S0.
That makes sense. So backwards compatible in the sense that this is not going to cause anything to stop doing its core function in the home, but there are some hardware, implications and things like that. So that makes sense. Talk quickly about just, and then we're going to move to some more high level stuff to close it out here. But talk quickly about how the Alliance, what is the protocol and process for sort of monitoring and enforcing these standards? I'm always interested in that because I think it's easy to, put things out there on a piece of paper, but what are the steps involved with the Alliance really monitoring and enforcing these sort of standards?
It's a great question. We have a certification process which mandates any product that is going to be sold commercially must go through the certification process. This is handled by third-party certification test houses. We have them in the US, we have them in Europe, and we have them in Asia. Now, the way that gets enforced, now there's no way to stop somebody from buying a developer's kit, and you can buy up to 500 chips before certification. So you could get 500 products out into the field that have not been certified. It's possible, but you couldn't buy any more. So if it's not certified, you can't buy the chips. So that's the mandate. Now, is that 100% bulletproof? No, someone can always circumvent the system. So we've always got the Z-Wave certification police out there trying to shut down anyone that's selling product that's not certified. And yeah, we find them. They exist. There are companies that always try to find the shortcut. But by and large, you're working with reputable companies. These guys, they follow the rules. So there's the technical certification. Then there's the market certification, and that's done by the Alliance, which makes sure that when the product hits the marketplace, it has the proper mark on it so that as a user, you can actually see, oh, this is a Z-Wave Plus product. It'll also have the certification ID number, so you can always check it. We want to make sure that the documentation is there so that the owner's manuals are accurate. So we have a pretty tight process in place to ensure that the products are what they say they are and will work the way that they're designed to work.
Very nice. Yeah, it's that's good to hear. It's almost like you care about your name.
Yeah, we really do. All it takes is one company to mess it all up. So we're all over it. Which, by the way, we never got into the service provider side, but this is why the service providers have chosen Z-Wave. We have 28 service providers globally versus, I want to say, Zigbee's got 4. And that's because of these things that we've talked about. And, service provider, I'm talking about companies like Orange, Deutsche Telekom, Verizon, Bell Reliant, and many, many others. And of course, on the security side, you've got something like between 90 and 95% of the monitored security panels in North America have Z-Wave deployed in it. That includes companies like Vivint, ADT, Alarm.com, and so on. So they've all bought into the approach and the philosophy that we've deployed on Z-Wave.
Very nice, very nice. What's this new Z-Wave Toolbox device that's out, and what are you guys trying to solve with that?
If you recall, I was with Universal Remote Control, and we deployed a Z-Wave gateway to try and to tie in whole house entertainment to whole house control, and we felt that Z-Wave is the way to go, and rightly so. And what would happen is we'd get installers very familiar with the IP side and the network side, not so much with Z-Wave. They'd install a Z-Wave gateway, put in a door lock, and then find that they're having problems with the door lock. It seems to be intermittent or not working at all. I found that there was a developer's tool that Sigma Designs would send somebody in, and they'd figure out very quickly that, okay, the problem is that you need to have a repeater in there. You need to put in another device. You're trying to communicate over too long a distance. And I wanted to get that tool for our installers, but they said, well, that's only a developer's tool. We don't have anything for installers. So basically, anyone deploying Z-Wave products out there had to kind of shrug their shoulders and go with their gut in terms of deploying Z-Wave. The beauty is this is not rocket science. It's relatively simple to deploy, but there was no way to really test the system to see, have I done it properly? Do I have enough devices in there? So, again, one of the things I neglected to talk about with the mesh network is, unlike what happens with Wi-Fi, where when you have too many people on the Wi-Fi network, it begins to slow down, if not kick people off the network. With Z-Wave's mesh network, the more devices you have on it, the stronger the network becomes. So one of the first things I started when I came on board as the executive director with Z-Wave is to say, okay, I'm going to take this developer's tool and I need to craft it into an installer's tool so that any installer can go out to a job site, and before they leave, they can go and run this tool, what I'm calling this toolbox, which is a whole set of diagnostics that determine the health of the system, all the devices communicating with each other. Is there interference? There's all kinds of testing that can be done before you leave the job site that says, oh, everything looks copacetic. This is great. And that's essentially what this tool is. And every installer out there that touches Z-Wave products is going to really want one of these things, because the worst thing as an installer that we could ever have happen is have to roll the truck right back out to find out where the problem is.
Right. And this is especially like and something that you don't even know what's happening or what's going on. Like it's a big mystery. This reminds me of the early days of like HDMI, where we had a cable, we had a receiver, we had a TV, and we had a DVD player, and we would plug these three things together, and some reason magically you would not get video on the TV, right, or you'd not get audio. And there was and almost to this day is still no real dealer level toolkit to determine what went wrong. Now,
amazing.
Luckily, HDMI has gotten better, and the receivers and sources and displays have gotten better at handling HDMI than they were in the earlier days. But yeah, that it's great you guys are coming out with that, because it eliminates that mystery for a service technician in the field trying to figure out what is wrong with this thing. And it's magical. Like these devices, you just plug them in, you get them identified and enrolled on the network, and then they just magically work. Well, that may be good for like the DIY crowd, but for integrators, we were getting paid at the end of the day. Yeah, that's a tough sell.
Yeah, you want to make sure all the lighting devices are connecting properly. Exactly right. And this toolbox can be left behind to be able to log activity should you not be able to determine where the problem is. It can also be permanently installed to be able to, go back and provide some maintenance if necessary, and adding devices if you want. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and we're pretty excited about it. It's going into beta testing next week, as a matter of fact, and we should be shipping it well before the end of March.
That's pretty cool. That's got like a former integrator's name written all over it. I think it's some really smart offering, and I'm sure people installing Z-Wave with any sort of regularity really appreciate that. And like you said, we'll want to get their hands on one of those. Running tight on our time here, so I want to wrap up and with sort of a high-level question. Obviously, just in the last 2-3 years, we've seen a ton of momentum in the smart home, and a lot of us have been around doing this for, years or decades. But with the entrance of companies like Apple and Google into the space, there's a lot of hype and publicity surrounding that. And, sometimes I think that may create challenges for a company like Z-Wave. And what do you guys plan to do as an alliance just to stay top of mind with the smart home consumer and make sure that you continue to, play a prominent role in the smart home moving forward?
Well, bear in mind that we have an existing ecosystem of over 1,700 products. Companies, from door lock companies, all companies that you're very familiar with. Even Samsung is, very much behind what we're doing with their SmartThings product. However, we also realize we can't stick our head in the sand and say, hey, we're just better, faster, or whatever we are, because there are other things going on. And we understand that Z-Wave is not the solution for every application of wireless. And there are times when obviously Wi-Fi is the much better choice when you talk about streaming content and things like that. So anyway, the shorter answer is to say that we are working with every one of the companies you've mentioned. Stay tuned for announcements regarding Apple. Stay tuned for announcements. Well, we're already working with Amazon, Google Home, we're working with them. And then there's this group called the OCF, which is a recently announced organization. That's the Open Connectivity Foundation. And you've got disparate companies such as Intel and Qualcomm. You never thought they'd sit at the same table, but they are here. Microsoft, Samsung are all members here. And the goal is not so much to establish yet another standard, because gosh, we don't need yet another standard, but to establish a platform by which all these different standards will become interoperable. So we are very much involved in that. And when you are a company like an Amazon, you say, look, we just want to sell a lot of gear and we want to do voice control. Well, you want to voice control over 1,700 products, let's work with Z-Wave. So we don't see any of these initiatives that I've mentioned as competitors so much as we see them as enablers for customers, for integrators to really be able to grow this thing called smart home. So we're pretty excited about it.
All right. Good answer. And we want to thank you again, Mitch, for taking the time to come on and join us here on the podcast. Really appreciate it. If anybody's listening and wanted to connect with you, maybe ask a couple of follow-up questions or find out a little bit more, what would be the best way for them to do that? Well,
we always welcome that. We always welcome integrators to join the Alliance and get some training and products. So you can go to our website, which is zwavealliance.org, and that's z-wavealliance.org, one word. You can also email me directly if you like, which is mitch@z-wavealliance.com, .org, pardon me. You can also Skype me at Mitch-Klein. And, love to hear from you guys. And if there's anything I can do, I'm always willing, able to help out fellow integrators.
Excellent. Well, Mitch, I want to echo what Jason said, and thanks for taking the time to join us on the show. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Look forward to it, guys. Been a pleasure.
All right, Mitch, take care.